Meanwhile, it's a discussion we've been having from a number of different angles, and that is the issue of panhandling, which is the subject, the focus of two ordinances in front of the Battle Creek City Commission right now. It's feasible that a final vote, a cursory vote, already took place to advance it to the next stage. It's very possible a final vote, one way or another, could eventuate on Tuesday in Battle Creek. And we've spoke from a number of angles on this subject. Today, Pastor Tom Ott is with us from the First Congregational Church in Battle Creek to talk a little bit from his perspective. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate that. There seems to be two perspectives predominantly on this thing. One that says, hey, we've got a contingent of folks who intimidate when they do this. They make people feel uneasy. Law enforcement doesn't have enough footing on which to pursue those kinds of situations when they come up. And so this helps sort that out. And then there's another school of thought that seems to circulate as well, which is you shouldn't be punished if you're poor. And so here we are trying to debate this whole situation. And then, of course, there's the legal wrinkles in this. The ACLU saying, you've got a line here, and it's very easy to cross it, legally speaking, when you're trying to write this verbiage. It might be enough to make your head spin. But anyway, here we are. And so from your perspective, where do you think we are with this thing?
Sure. So I think public safety and public rights are these two things that our city council has to hold in the right tension. And, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there have always been two groups that have been singled out for special favor, the poor and the alien.
Right.
And as a culture, we seem to be struggling with both right now.
Right.
So in the political debate, there's lots of conversation about what to do with illegal immigrants. Scripture's pretty unambiguous about that. The measure of compassion is indicated by our response to the poor and the alien residents in our midst. So that's our tradition. The struggle is, how do we incorporate that into law, and how do we do that in a way that honors everyone? So the thing that scares me about the current legislation that we're looking at is this notion that we should protect people from feeling threatened, right? So, so if I'm and the test is a reasonable person. If a reasonable person would feel threatened in this, well, I consider myself a reasonable person. If a tall black man approaches me and asks me for money, I'm going to feel threatened. That's not because of what he's done. That's because of my own internalized racism. Like, I've grown up believing that big black men are dangerous. Now, if a petite white woman comes to me with the exact same behavior, I don't feel threatened. So how can we pass a law that makes it illegal for a tall black man to do something and legal for a petite white woman to do the exact same thing, right? So that's, to me, that's the objectionable part of the legislation that's being looked at. It's about legislating feeling. I feel threatened, therefore I need laws to protect me. Now, in our tradition, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we're required to care for the poor. And the poor make us uncomfortable. They make me uncomfortable. I'd rather not see them. I'd rather not know it's there. I feel much more comfortable going through my day, not having to bump into someone who has less than I do. Because when I see them, it provokes in me a lot of stuff that feels unpleasant. It provokes guilt. Like, here I am with credit cards in my wallet and money in my wallet, and I can walk past this person. I have privilege that person doesn't have. And yet, my faith tradition says we are connected. I am my brother's keeper. This is my responsibility to share what I have with the poor. So compassion and generosity those are all like bedrock principles of our faith. And every time we're confronted by someone who's asking us for help, it's forcing us deeper into our faith. Do I really believe the things that I claim to?
Well, that's interesting. And you, boy, just in that couple of minutes there, you've given us some things to think about. Even though I think what you're trying to say is even though the verbiage of what's being considered doesn't say to the extent of what you just said, black, white, small, large, whatever, I think what you're saying is our lens it does include that.
Absolutely. Yeah, the language is, so it shall be unlawful for a person to solicit alms by approaching another person in a way that would cause a reasonable person to feel terrorized, frightened, intimidated, threatened, harassed, or molested. So it's the emotional experience that the person has that defines the guilt or innocence of another person. That's absurd. We can't, like, if you get me, if I feel intimidated being in this radio studio with you, like, don't ask for money. Like, that's all I'm going to say.
I understand. It's an interesting precedent then, I think is your point, because there could be other situations in which we might feel threatened as well.
Sure.
And
There are parts of the statute that make sense. Like, okay, we don't, like, standing outside of an ATM machine waiting for a person who's, like, just removed a handful of cash, that a reasonable person would feel threatened by that. It's a dangerous, it's a riskier scenario than a person walking down the street in public in the light of day. Like, so we do have this legitimate need to preserve public safety, and we always have to hold that in the right tension with public rights.
Pastor Tom Ott is here from First Congregational Church. We'll come back in just a minute and continue on this subject, the panhandling subject, trying to understand the perspectives here and, trying to help folks make up their own minds, I suppose, about what this means. We're coming back in just a minute. We're here with Pastor Tom Ott. This half hour from First Congregational Church, we've been discussing the panhandling issue. I think a lot of us in the community are just trying to figure out this issue, and we seem to take the approach that the more we talk about it and the more folks who can chime in on it, the better, as we try to sort this out. And so Pastor Tom's been helpful with that. You, at First Congregational, God's Kitchen is situated there at times. There are probably other opportunities where folks who are in need come through, and so you and your congregation see this, and this is part of the reason why we asked you here today, is because you're there in sort of a zone where some of this might be happening. Have you been hearing from your congregation about this issue at all?
So at the First Congregational Church, we get a lot of people coming into our building needing help.
Yeah.
Like most churches, we're struggling to stay in business, right? Church attendance everywhere is declining, and so it's always a struggle. So we have a fund that we hold at church. We do a special offering to provide emergency assistance, and so we help with small gifts. Like, we don't have the resources to pay $500 to get your power back on.
Sure.
But we're talking about a really vulnerable population, and there's this. So if my car breaks down, I've got I can take my wife to work and use her car. But if a family living in poverty has a car and it breaks down, it starts this avalanche of problems that quickly escalate to a critical crisis. So, a $75 repair bill becomes, gee, I didn't get to work today, I didn't get paid today, because I'm short of my paycheck, I can't cover my rent, because I'm behind in my rent, I'm in jeopardy of losing my home, like all of this.
These dominoes fall.
Right, so I think a lot of times we think, the little that I have to give is inconsequential. that's not the case. The little that we have to give can be the difference between stability or crisis. And so, when someone comes in, we listen to their story, and I think that's really important. When we're asked on the street for help, we make our own story up about that person, and it's usually not very flattering. Mm-hmm. It's usually they're just lazy, or they're strung out on drugs, or they're going to use this to buy alcohol, all of which may be true.
Yeah, that's the thing. Some of this that's woven into this whole thing is there's an element of truth in some cases.
Sure,
that. Yeah.
Sure. Yep, and the exception becomes the rule, right? So, not many people wake up in the morning thinking, "Gee, this is a great day for soliciting help from strangers." That's terrifying work. It's degrading. It's demeaning. It's like the last resort that people get to, and yet we make up this mythology about, oh well, instead of working, they've chosen just to stand in the corner and hold a sign, and so seeing people face to face and interacting with them is really important. I mean, that's where the heart of compassion really gets formed.
Mm-hmm. The folks from the Share Center in the Haven have been here, and when they were here earlier this week, they said, you know what? We could be doing more as organizations to try and help eliminate this problem. Yeah. And the inference was we could be doing more to try and work on this as opposed to ordinances written into the law.
Yeah.
Do you see that to be true? Are we not doing enough in our community?
There are a lot of people struggling in our community, and there's no such thing as doing too much to help the poor, right? So, I think that's right. I think that there are as many people soliciting as there are is an indication of the depth of need in our community. And I mean, you see it driving. I mean, we're where we are, within a mile and a half of our church, the average household income is $10,000 below the state average income. Wow. More than half of the properties within a mile and a half of our church are single parent households. A lot of them haven't finished high school, so they haven't had success in their own educational lives, so they don't qualify for jobs that get them out of this cycle of poverty, which is one of the things that led us to start a preschool in our church. We recognize that we've got high-risk kids all around the church, and if we can give them a resource to help them be successful when they get to school, that's the thing that's going to break this cycle of poverty. But what are we doing to our schools? Are we raising our supportive schools? Are we figuring out how to cooperate across these 4 districts instead of competing with each other? Are we improving the educational program? I don't think so. My wife's a teacher, and she doesn't come home thrilled with all the resources that have been channeled in her direction to help with the educational process.
A theme you've introduced here or reminded us about, maybe is a better way to put it, is the notion of helping the poor, and that's been a pillar of the judgment of compassion. When we look at this situation and say, I don't want to see that, that person might be punking me, I don't know if they're telling the truth or not. Does that go against that?
Yeah, sure. So, Jesus was pretty clear about that. He said, give to everyone who asks of you.
Wow.
It wasn't, fully vet everyone who asks of you and make sure their cause is just and they've exhausted every other option. And
that wasn't part of it.
That's not in the text.
Yeah.
So Sermon on the Mount, the 6th chapter of Matthew, Jesus is pretty unambiguous. This is what it means to be a Christian, to be a person of faith. So I don't give to everyone who asks of me. And I should feel guilty when I see someone in need and choose not to respond. That's that's good for my spiritual welfare. I need that experience to become a better person. So giving alms is a spiritual practice in Christianity. It's not just for the sake of the person who's receiving the aid. It's for the giver. That's what creates a spirit of generosity in us. And that's the life that we're called to live.
Well, we appreciate the time you've given us, and I think you've given the city something to think about in terms of the verbiage of this ordinance, as have others in this discussion. But you've also given us something to think about as folks who harbor compassion, just how much we're employing that.
Yeah.
So
Thanks
we
so much for
appreciate
having
that
me.
time. Thank you. Pastor Tom Ott with the First Congregational Church in Battle Creek on WBCK.